Okay, so I apologize in advance for what I'm about to put you through. I did it last year and I probably apologize then too. And that is a bunch of slides with a bunch of numbers on them. My aim, of course, is to attempt to help us all understand the current financial condition of St. Mark's Church. All of this will be posted on the website and I'm available at your convenience at coffee hour today or any subsequent Sunday or via email, of course, if you have any questions. So I'm curious, so indulge me for just a moment. Show of hands, for whom among you is this your first annual meeting? Interesting. You're all sitting together. And for whom among you is this, let's say, 5 or more annual meetings you've been to? Okay, so there's the choir that we're preaching to. Both Father Peter and Stan and Janet have done a great job in messaging some of the things I wanted to point out today. So what's our agenda? I'm moving forward with that, hopefully. Yep, excellent. Okay. Just a brief discussion about our economic context. Of course, we live in that world and our finances are impacted greatly. An update on our endowments and trusts, an update on the Inspired by Love campaign results up to this point in time as of year end. Our 2023 financial results, of course, our budget, which is a draft budget as it stands right now for 2024. A quick look at our liquidity as of year end from our balance sheet, highlights for 2023, and then looking ahead to the coming year, what's on our to-do list. Okay, first, no surprise here, this slide is the resurgence, demonstrates the resurgence of inflation that started post-COVID due to initially to supply chain issues. So after really 2 decades or more of really tame inflation of the order of 2%, we had inflation spike starting in 2021 to 5, 6, 7%. And we can see right here in the more recent times that those rates of inflation have abated a bit. They're back down to sort of 3% on a year-over-year basis. Okay, so what has been the Fed's response to that and the impact on interest rates, which is an important part of our investment portfolios? As a result of that inflation, the Fed initiated a series of rate increases starting in 2022. And we can see here in blue, the Fed funds target rate, you can see started to increase very rapidly, starting in mid-2022 and reached a level of just over 5.25%. In the middle point of 2023. Inflation was bad news, of course, for consumers, all of us, and it was bad news for St. Mark's as costs rose. But the flip side of the coin was that interest rates rising made the relatively low risk asset class of fixed income investments a relatively reasonable rate of return. As a matter of fact, our interest income for 2023 alone was over $30,000 just in our operating bank accounts. So that was well above budget and greatly needed and received. In recent months, as inflation has eased, investors are believing that the rate increases have come to an end and that the Fed's next move will be toward lower rates. So in pink, we've got the yield on the 10-year Treasury. I'm having problems with the mouse, but you can see more recently that rate of return has come down. Okay, so how did all this impact the most significant asset class among our long-term investments? So here's a proxy, a look at the S&P 500 stock index. On this chart, we see that the index is plotted on a logarithmic scale. So the slope of a straight line represents a rate of increase, or if you will, a rate of return. I've drawn a line in here that you can see that has a 7% slope. Why 7%? Nothing particular special about that, but that rate of price increase in the S&P 500 index over time, plus say a 2 or 3% annual dividend rate, adds up to a reasonable proxy for a long-term rate of return on U.S. equities of 9 to 10% per year. So we could see various epochs on the chart over the last several decades. The dot-com bubble, as indicated on the chart, the credit crisis of 2008, the sell-off caused by the COVID crisis, followed by in the extended rally as the Fed dropped short-term interest rates back down to essentially zero. And then more recently, as inflation returned, and the Fed started increasing interest rates, equity share prices sold off in competition or with those higher interest rates. And then more recently, since literally October 31st of this last year, stocks rallied back as the market participants perceived that interest rates had reached their apex and that the Fed's next move would be to ease. So at this point in time, we're actually, as you all know from watching the news, at new highs on the equity prices. Okay, so a review of our endowments and trust. You may recall that our long-term investments are held in two components. One, the donations and bequests fund of the Episcopal Diocese of Connecticut, which is managed by the Bank of America. And in addition, our beneficial share in the Lancaster Trust, which is managed by Deutsche Bank. As you'll recall, we are currently engaged in adding funds to our D&B endowment by donations received from our Inspired by Love campaign. The Lancaster Trust Fund, however, is static in that there are no external funds added to it, and we have effectively no say in its management. We draw income from both on a monthly basis into our operations, and increasing our D&B endowment is a significant component of our strategy to help address what in recent years has been a fairly stagnant level of pledge income, as you've heard about. At the end of 2023, our D&B endowment was at $8.2 million, as you can see on the bar chart. In the Lancaster Trust, an additional $1.7 million. In general, the investment stance of the D&B endowment is the more conservative of the two funds, i.e. a lower portion is held in equities. But overall, as you can see from the pie chart, the two portfolios in aggregate are roughly 69% held in equities at the end of the year, 20% in fixed income. So a bunch of numbers on this slide, but let's, I think, really focus on the colored box to the right, which is really, which is the sum of the two, Lancaster Trust and donations and bequests. And all this is just a review of the flows in those two funds. So we started the year at $8 million. We added just over $1 million, which were monies received from the Inspired by Love campaign that were destined or designated to go to the endowment. We withdrew in our draw, as we spoke to earlier, as was said to you, $411,000, and the balance was income and realized or unrealized gain of $1.3 million, ending the year at that $9.9 million that we talked about on the earlier slide for the total of the two investment sources. Here's an update on this slide of the Inspired by Love campaign to date. So you'll recall that our campaign leadership, along with all of you, produced a fantastic result of $7.5 million in commitments to St. Mark's to be fulfilled by 2026. So far, through December 31st of last year, we've received in $4.5 million of that amount. And by designation of our vestry, 2/3 of campaign monies will go toward the endowment and the balance toward capital improvements to our campus. So far, $2.5 million has been submitted to the endowment at donations and bequests. And as of year end, we have an additional $398,000 that's ready to be shipped off. Of the $1.4 million we received over on the right for funds designated for capital expenditures, we've spent $1.25 million so far on campus improvements and have $193,000 on hand in the bank, ready for additional expenditures. So of the $3 million outstanding that has been pledged to the campaign, of course, 2/3 of that, or $2 million, will end up in the donations and bequest endowment, and an additional $1 million will go toward additional CapEx. Okay, so here's an update on a slide I shared with you last year, a revised estimate of how we project our endowment and trust draw will grow in the next couple of years. There are some mechanics here, so I apologize if this is a bit obtuse. Basically, for the draw calculations from the donations and bequest endowment, which some of the mechanics are shown in the upper graph, at October 31st each year, we use a trailing 12 quarters average share price for the fund. That share price, or those price points being graphed in blue. We multiply that average by the number of shares we own at October 31st, and take a percentage of that quantity as our draw for the following year, calendar year. Currently, that percentage that we're drawing is at 5%, which is at the high end of the range, generally deemed to be judicious. We'd like it to be more like 4.5%, but our financial needs are such that the vestry has said we'll draw at 5% rate. Okay, in the graph at the top, I'm showing the same information I presented to you last year with the green and red lines that are somewhat less bold are the projections I had last year for how the share price for the D&B endowment would grow. The updated values are shifted a little bit to the right, or of course a year later, and I've taken the December 31st share price for the D&B endowment and projected that share price increasing at green, the 15% rate of return, and red, the 5% rate of return. Results probably somewhere in between, but long story short, you can see those projection bands are very similar to what they were last year. So there really isn't a tremendous difference in the endowment draw forecast that's shown in the graph at the bottom. So I've repeated our 2023 draw, and please note, as indicated on the graph, that this draw amount is for both that we're graphing here is for both the D&B endowment and for the Lancaster Trust. The Lancaster Trust fund draw is about $75,000. So if you want to think about the D&B draw alone, you would reduce these numbers on this graph by $75,000. Long story short, as Janet spoke to, by 2026, we think the total of the two will be pulling 550 to 600,000, slightly over, into our operations every year. So incredible success that the Inspired by Love campaign has made for us. Is it a sinecure? Does it solve all our problems? No, not necessarily, because if we look at our budget and we think about inflation, a few percent on our budget, let's say every 1% of our budget increasing is about $25,000. So even though we're increasing our draw from, let's say, 2023 levels of low 400,000, we think maybe if we're lucky we get up to 600,000, $200,000 increase. Inflation can really take a bite out of that. All right, here's our pizza pie chart. We love this. Lots of colors. I will never print this out. It will cost me a fortune. So just on the income side and the expense side for 2023, just a pie chart of where the money's come from and where the monies are spent. As you can see, pledge, gift, and plate, 69%, and endowment and trust in blue for 2023 was 16%. The former, the green, in general, is decreasing. A decreasing proportion of our revenues are coming from pledge, gift, and plate. As you've heard, our pledges have generally been stagnant. In blue, the endowment and trust draw, of course, its percentage as a proportion of our revenues is increasing over time, and we expect that to continue. On the expense side, this is an incredible campus, and when I walk around here and think about what it must cost to run this place, it just terrifies me. Most of our costs, however, are for funding our compensation benefits of our staff. It's a small staff. They do an incredible job. They work incredibly hard. as I know many of you know. All right, so here's the big kahuna. Let me get the right notes here. Okay, I'm gonna do my best to use my pointer. Unfortunately, if there's a tech in the crowd, that would be awesome because the pointer will go away. It's there and then it goes away. Okay, so where am I? So I'll use the pointer, which disappears, unfortunately, to try to point things out to you. First, I want to give a quick review, and you've really already heard it, of the microeconomic context that is St. Mark's, and to some extent, churches more broadly. We've had a known systemic struggle for many years now. Our operations are in general underfunded, and the annual struggle is very, very real. A lot of stomach lining, a lot of teeth gnashing. By the way, you probably know this already. We're not alone in this regard. This is an issue for many churches nationwide. Why do I say this is a known systemic issue? Well, I'll draw your attention to a few things on this graph. Most principally, this line, clergy gift. Okay, and it actually preceded 2019 as well. But these funds, through two very generous parishioners, were made available so that we could fully staff our clergy with 3 incredibly talented preachers. So that alone tells you, we knew years ago, we've got an issue for paying for our expenses. In addition to that, on this chart, we benefited greatly from federal relief funds that my predecessor, I'm looking at him right there, brought into our operations. That's 450,000 or so of funds that came from PPP monies for COVID relief. Okay, so we know we have a systemic issue here. I have to keep repeating that. I repeat it to myself. We repeat it in the vestry. I think all of us with some periodicity, for all of you, once a year, it bears repeating. These sources of funding are, of course, gone. They don't exist anymore. Okay, you'll hopefully recall that when I reported to you last year, our budget at this point in time for 2023, the year we just completed, was $90,000 deficit. We did not like that. Parishioners did respond to that, however, in the beginning of the year, and we received some overpayments. That said, you may also recall Reverend Elizabeth in the fall referring to a white knuckle Christmas with regard to the 2024 pledge campaign. Well, I have to tell you that 2023 financials were truly a white knuckle condition for both fists, even as late as our mid-December vestry meeting. Okay, so mid-December, vestry meets, I believe it was the 19th, slightly beyond mid-December. And at that time we were forecasting, and I reported to them that our 2023 deficit would be even worse than the budgeted $90,000. We thought it would be more like $100,000 at that point. Terrible. It wasn't until the last 2 weeks of the year when we were saved by a miraculous gift, you've heard about it, of $75,000 from the Barbara Benton Davis Fund and some generous pledge overpayments from some of our parishioners. So I'm elated to report to you, with my disappearing cursor, there it is, that the 2023 bottom line down here appropriately at the bottom is a balanced budget, small surplus. Percentage-wise, flat. It's incredible. So some key points to make for 2023. Of our pledge gift and plate figure, 1.7 odd million here, perhaps $150,000 of that we know to be non-recurring for 2024. Not going to be there. Okay. Also, our annual draw from our endowment has been increasing at a rapid pace. Last year, 411,000, slated to be 474,000 for 2024. And of course, Mayfair. So the contributions to Mayfair, which included $25,000 that was destined to be checks written for outreach grants, was over $136,000. Whoops, a record. On the expense side for 2023, you've heard it It bears repeating. The bottom line in terms of our expenditures were actually less in 2023 than they were in 2022, the prior year. So that's incredible. So turning to our draft budget for 2024 as it stands right now, but while our pledge campaign goal, as you heard, is still 1.7 million, our experience and the results as they stand so far have us budgeting in this figure here a pledge component of 1.6 million. We will draw the 474,000 that we mentioned earlier. We're praying for good weather for May and that we can pull $100,000 in net revenue from Mayfair for 2024. On the expense side, underlying our expense budget is a roughly 3% cost of living increase for staff. There's no merit in there. That's cost of living. So at this point, our bottom line budget for 2024, as it stands now, is for a deficit of $115,000. Okay. Nobody likes that. And I would also point out for our budget, the budget figure for all other expenses of $881,000. If you scan across the preceding numbers, is actually the lowest number from 2019 through 2023. Okay, some of that is because we've taken what were outsourced expenses for campus management back into compensation and benefits with the hiring of Edgar. Father Peter spoke to that, which all on staff are in agreement that is an incredible hire. So some of that is the reason for that number being low. Nonetheless, we continue to have tightened belts in our budgeting for 2024. And with that, we're still looking at that deficit that you see here. So that's our current assessment for the coming year. I hope that another miracle comes our way. I may start praying, and while I'm at it, may it come before the last 2 weeks of 2024. Wouldn't that be nice? Okay, a quick look at our liquidity as it stood at the end of 2023. We take our cash and securities off the balance sheet and we reduce, as you can see, funds that are restricted for the uses indicated, St. Mark's Preschool, monies in capital campaign that are due to be shipped off to the endowment or on hand for capital expenditures, et cetera, et cetera. Bottom line, we get to an estimate of our net liquidity general reserve of $725,000. Okay, and of that amount, 194,000 is 2024 pledges that had been received by the end of 2023. So we've got some interesting thought experiments going on as to, is that reserve or is that not? It's not easy. But anyway, our liquidity is in good shape. Okay, 2023 highlights part of the reason why our liquidity, I think, is in good shape at this point in time is that we applied and received a final COVID-related federal benefit, which was the Employee Retention Tax Credit, sometimes called the ERC, sometimes called the ERTC. We received in 2023 $329,000 as part of the Employee Retention Tax Credit. We have outstanding an application that has been submitted and we expect to receive at some point $111,000 in addition. We did not take those funds into operations. I think that's judicious because those are non-recurring monies. So I think the perspective that we took is the right one, which is this is money to shore up our reserve. Okay, positive pay banking controls. Positive pay is a process that Bankwell has initiated. Boy, is this boring. For bill payment, we pay bills largely through checks. We run risk of fraud. We've had some near incidents in that regard with checks that get lost in the mail. Positive pay is a process to help reduce the risk of that, where there's like a call and response between the check being cut, the bank receiving that information, and then call and response from us that yes, that's valid information. Short-term cash investing, we spoke to that. Capital projects, I'm not the expert to speak to that, but our magna cum laude or summa cum laude, general contractor and director of operations, spearheaded the capital projects that we've spoken to before, and you can see here. So looking ahead, we don't have an assistant treasurer. It's prudent for succession planning to have an assistant treasurer. So if you see anybody who looks like an assistant treasurer, apart from Janet, she's spoken for, let me know. Finance and investment endowment committees, I mean, we're always rotating folks off those committees. We're always looking for talented individuals to replace the talented individuals that roll off. Electronic bill payment, we'd like to reduce use of check writing. Not sure Venmo's the way to go. And of course, we're always looking to improve our reporting process. So it's an incredible honor and pleasure to serve as your representative as treasurer. And, you know, the people of St. Mark's, no surprise, are incredible. The clergy, the staff, all of you, some of whom are listed here. I recommend the experience to anyone, and I know most of you are the choir, know all about that more than I do. But, you know, Janet and Stan's theme of participation, being in community and serving this community is deeply rewarding. So thank you, everybody. Please, no questions, because I can't answer.